with his club of 12 strong. So thank you for being here. You just opened a new club in Anderson, is that right?
Yeah, it's called the Greater Anderson Kiwanis Club, and they are about 2 months old.
Okay. Well, good. We're expanding, and that's a great thing because it's all about helping children. So, Greg, I think I'll turn it over to you for a thought for the day.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes.
Okay, thank you. And we're certainly glad to have Ed here with us as well from Anderson. I saw that Ed on different note that a monument was just set for Carl Erskine and Johnny Wilson, the great basketball stars and great Americans that are from Anderson. And I was just up in Anderson at the Mounds State Park. What a special place Anderson is. Very great history from the Delawareans to the modern Delco, Ramey, etc. So glad to have you with us. So my assignment is to say a few words about whatever, and there's no allusions in this particular statement from this week's or our we have a publication that I write a little column on. So July 4th is coming up. I thought I'd try to say something a little bit different about July 4th. Obviously, our Independence Day is coming up, and we're very proud of that, and how we have over the years reconnected with our British enemies at that time, and how things do get worked out eventually. I mean, we probably don't think too much anymore any of King George, that's for sure, but we've reconciled. And then I was thinking about the Civil War and how we had just celebrated Memorial Day, and how that really came back from a honoring of those who died on both sides. I mean, I guess I'm commemorating, not honoring, but commemorating those who fought for what they believed in. But we don't really honor people like Lee, and as certain people are excluded. Then I was thinking we're going to have Eva Kor's son from the Holocaust and Graham are going to do a book review of their teachings of Eva and Mickey Kor about forgiveness. And then I was looking at an article in Summary recently about a concept called oblivion. Oblivion is an ancient concept about accounting for what you've done, whether it was in Greek times or in modern times, and about possibly reconciling people, particularly on a night like this with this debate coming up, but reconciling concerns and trying to work together. And that doesn't mean this oblivion concept goes back in generations. And I'm trying to show a trend here, and not necessarily a forgiving those who were the instigators of something like the Civil War or an insurrection, but trying to reconcile those who did participate in one way or the other, either by choice or by being forced to. And I certainly don't want to exclude anything that other people working together in combative situations. So in July 4th, remember that we are one nation. We're not all blue, not all red. We are Americans, and we have to look at it that way. And that's what, to me, July 4th means. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We will not be here on July 4th, next Thursday, because it is Independence Day, and because Roger and I are headed to Denver for the International Kiwanis Convention, which is the 3rd through the 6th. We are both looking forward to that. And usually the Saturday annual meeting is streamlined, so we'll share that information once we have it for you if you're interested. We will return to the Columbia Club on the 11th and hear Carly Lanich and Claire Radiff, who are education reporters from Mirror Indy. We met Carly at the opening of the Shortridge Key Club Community Closet in May. Both advisor Chelsea English and Key Club President Sweet Knight will join us that day. The next lunch bunch is July the 15th at Iozo's. Let Roger know if you are interested in attending. And we've rescheduled our board meeting to a few weeks later than normal, July 23rd, which is a Tuesday morning. We have a next social supper, which is going to be downtown. As you know, we try to rotate those throughout the city. So it's downtown this next time, which is going to be on the 23rd. And it's a Tuesday at Lavino's on Mass Avenue. So looking forward to as many as possible. Just give me an email or a text and let me know if you can make it. Bring a friend, a spouse, somebody off the street. We don't care. We just like to have a good time and socialize. And Karen Burns has offered to open her condo for just a little get together at her place in downtown Indy. And that's going to be the following week on the 30th. We'll get you more information on that later, because we really haven't formed all the nuances of how we're going to work, how we're going to pull that off, but we'll let you know. So in August, Greg mentioned Graham Honecker. He was interviewed from Latvia on Sunday, along with Alex Core, about their book, A Blessing, Not a Burden. And so in August 22nd, they will be here and will be our speakers. And there's a link to the interview is in the chat box. Visit the website, indykiwanis.org, for the list of programs so you know what's coming up either on Zoom or at the Columbia Club. The 3 upcoming programs will also be on the homepage. You can go to the upcoming events section for the complete list. And also remember, we have a Facebook page, so it's there as well. Abe Lincoln met at the international headquarters Saturday. Wendy, do you want to share information on that and the building, etc.? The tour?
Okay, yes. And thanks again to Laura Holloway, who was our hostess for that meeting. We were able to meet in the Hickson boardroom. And after having a really good meeting of the Abe Lincoln Committee, we were able to have a tour. Laura led us through the multiple levels into the Moorhead Auditorium, up and down the hallways, even into the basement to see photographs of everything from our past leaders and what the early conventions look like to the floats in the Rose Bowl parade that Kiwanis puts in every year. It was so much fun to see former CKI governors' pictures on the wall. Tom Eubank, Scott Beerby. Oh my goodness, it was great. I mean, and the story about how haircuts had to be above the ears for a certain number of decades for the men, because of course that's all we had as leaders back then for a while. Mary and I definitely signed the guest book in one of the conference rooms. I don't know if anyone else had that pleasure, but it was great. And I really, really appreciate that Laura made that possible.
Thank you, Wendy. So I think it's time for our speaker. Wendy, would you like to introduce her, please?
Sure. Okay. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce Annie Wood Bell. Her work resonates deeply with us because of the work we've done with fostering families and the work we do with students who are nominated for the Abe Lincoln Committee. And you'll hear more about that in a moment. But Annie has lived, worked, and played in Anderson, Indiana for 17 years. She's a licensed clinical social worker with a bachelor's in social work from Anderson University and a master's in social work from IUPUI. Annie is grateful to have spent over 8 years as a therapist to many courageous people, concentrating much of her work on trauma treatment. Starting in 2020, she moved into macro social work, where she worked as a training consultant with Heart of Indiana United Way. In 2024, she moved into full-time work as the Director of Family Success for Heart of Indiana United Way, which is a 5-county reach. She trains and provides ongoing support to networks of coaches, community health workers, other professionals and community members, so that they can strengthen the financial stability of individuals and families and help them achieve their short and long-term goals. In her spare time, Annie enjoys singing with her family in the kitchen, taking her dog for walks, and going out with her besties. So I turn it over to you, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And I realized I mistyped. I started working full-time for United Way in 2023 in January of that year. So I was like, oh shoot, I mistyped something, but thank you for that introduction. It's always a little weird to like hear the bio you wrote for yourself out loud. Um, but yeah, so grateful to be here. And I am Annie, Director of Family Success at Heart of Indiana United Way, and love the work I get to do, primarily supporting networks of professionals to work directly with individuals and families in our communities. So we serve Delaware, Madison County, Henry, Fayette, and Randolph counties. The primary work I do is in Madison and Delaware, and we're brainstorming ways of how we can reach other counties with the work that I do in particular, and the rest of our staff. So we merged 3 years ago this summer with the Delaware County. I'm primarily in Madison County, the Delaware County United Way office. And so yeah, we're still pretty new in trying to figure out how do we span 5 counties and use our skill set, but also take some risks and try new things. So I am going to share my screen. So give me just a moment. Make sure I get this all present. There we go. Yes. There we go. And there is one video moment. So once I get there, I will make sure you all can hear the sound. But do you all hear me okay? Is
We
my
do.
volume all right? Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to do a presentation I've done in various settings. Typically, this presentation takes a couple hours, so I've reduced it, and also I will predominantly be kind of lecture mode where I'm giving you a lot of information, but there will be moments where I ask you to engage with the chat. So hopefully you all know how to use that function, but there might be, if you don't and you want to share, please unmute and just say out loud. It's not, you're not doing anything wrong if you unmute and share. But those moments where I ask some questions, I'll say use the chat, or if you need to unmute and share, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But we're going to be talking about positive and adverse childhood experiences today. And really just in some ways just scratching the surface of what those terms mean. So what are adverse childhood experiences? What does that mean in the research? How do they impact us in the short and long term, identifying what positive childhood experiences are. So combined PACEs is the acronym that I use. I still don't think it's super widely known. A lot of people, especially in kind of the social work, mental health field, know the term ACEs, and even the layperson. Some people are fairly familiar with that, but positive childhood experiences is not as well known because the specific research on those, and I'll kind of lay out what those are in the research, is still within about 10 years of research kind of looking into those experiences. So that's a newer idea, looking at both of those sets of experiences, looking at how those impact us, and then giving just, again, scratching the surface of how do we both prevent adverse childhood experiences? So what are some of those kind of larger prevention approaches? How do we respond to and help heal and recover from adversity that becomes traumatic for people? And that could happen in childhood where some of that healing and recovery takes place, or it might happen in adulthood where that happens. And so just again, looking at the foundations of those pieces. So first off with engaging in the chat. I know most of you through Zoom, your name is already connected to your chat response, so you don't have to say your name. But if you would put in the chat, what is your favorite childhood show? And then what do you hope to get out of this session today? I may not meet all of your hopes, but I like to know what people are hoping for. So there might be moments I can highlight the connection as I get there. So what's your favorite childhood show? And what do you hope to get out of this session? So I see Flintstones, Disney Clubhouse, Bugs Bunny, hoping to get
Well,
information.
some of us are old enough to remember Mr. Green Jeans. So that's way long ago with Captain Kangaroo. So that's why you don't have a lot of input from the older people, the mature people in this group.
You're good. I mean, that's why I like to ask this question because, it helps connect people with, oh my gosh, I watched that too. Or, looking at generations or looking at cultural groups of the varied experiences we've had. So Mr. Green Jeans, is that what you said? Yeah, not
Yes, with
ever heard
Captain
of that.
Kangaroo. Yes.
Speed Racer, Schoolhouse Rock, Gilligan's Island, Electric Company, Sesame Street. To get out of the time, Trina wrote, hoping to gain a better perspective what kids are facing and the impacts of their experiences. Does anybody else want to unmute and share what they hope to get out of this time together today? You're welcome to do that.
This is Roger. I'm just curious to see. My daughter is a doctor in public health
Okay.
and epidemiology. I'm wondering, see, she's probably facing some of the same things you are. She's doing studies,
Okay.
cancer research right now.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested in how these can connect, how they do connect, possibly.
Absolutely. Yeah, she would be a fun person to include on a session like this.
Yeah.
She would have a really great perspective.
And I've got
Yeah.
a question, Greg Silver's answer for his favorite show, Mr. Rogers. That wasn't around when you were a child, Greg? No response.
Well, and that's the not intentional trick of the question, but sometimes people's favorite childhood show is not necessarily what was in their childhood, but their favorite show geared towards children. Absolutely. Yeah. I always tell people mine was Price is Right and talk shows because I was the third. I was the youngest. So I was exposed to, cartoons. My older siblings were gone and done with those when I got old enough to remember what I watched.
Well, you got to remember, we're thinking about 1950s.
I love it.
Um,
I love it.
when it was 4 channels, 3 of them come in.
Yep.
I love that.
All right.
Laura, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to jump in on the agree with Greg on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and that was for me as a kid. That was prime programming. So, I also wanted to add about what I was hoping to get out of this. I just learned about the the rights of a child, or the Convention of on the rights of the child. I forget the exact term of it, but it's from the UN, and that's where I'm trying to educate the students that I work with on that, and I thought it matches what United Way does, and I just would like to learn more about that in general, or if there is any area that overlaps.
Awesome. Yeah, Laura, if you are welcome to, if you have the document or the website for Rights of a Child, if you track that down, I'd love for you to put that in the chat. I have not looked at that particular resource, I don't think ever. So thanks.
It's a big one, but it's all
Yeah.
things that make perfect sense and things that we might take for granted here.
Yeah.
But some people don't. So yeah, I could share the link to the Unison website.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. I'm gonna keep us going. So a couple things I want you to keep in mind. Like I said, I'm going to cover a lot of ground in this. And so if you don't leave with anything but even these first couple slides, just keeping these core ideas, concepts, what we've gathered from the research in mind is that the majority of us, about 2/3, 60 something odd percent, sometimes 64, sometimes it's even higher percentages of us, depending on the states and the communities you're looking at, but about 63 to 66% of us had at least one adverse childhood experience as defined by the literature. And the majority of us, about 8 out of 10 of us, have experienced and I'm going to move this so I'm saying 3 or more positive childhood experiences as defined by the literature. And so the research about ACEs, there's typically 9 or 10 questions that ask about ACEs, adversity, and there's 7 that have been identified in research so far as identified positive childhood experiences. So having at least one ACE, but having 3 or more positive childhood experiences. Something that showed up in a training, I want to say about 2 or 3 years ago, that they really hammered hard, because when we first started talking about ACEs more, the original ACE study came out in 1998. However, we really haven't talked about ACEs until probably 2010 plus, but really closer even to 2020. More widespread talking about that study, and then states doing studies themselves and getting more of that data out there, because the original study was just done in Southern California. But more recent studies and incorporating the positive childhood experience piece is knowing that ACEs are absolutely preventable. And that is something that I still have a hard time believing, because it's going to take a lot to prevent a lot of these hard things that happen that, if most of us have them, right there, it's rampant. It's happening to the majority of individuals and families, really, no matter what their race, no matter what their income, no matter what their family structure is, they're happening to a lot of us. And yet what we know through research is there are absolute strategies and programs and policies and systems that we know work, but we're not implementing them in a widespread way to prevent ACEs. So ACEs are absolutely preventable, and they're treatable. So even when they happen, we can prevent the number from raising high and the number of ACE experiences, but we also can respond, we also can respond to when they happen, and responding as soon as possible to when they happen is very helpful in preventing those longer term impacts. And we all are a part of that. We all have a role to play. It can't be done unless everybody is on board, with being a part of that. So when you hear adverse childhood experiences, feel free to either say out loud or use the chat, to just kind of, one word, one phrase, or one even image that comes to mind. What comes to mind when you hear adverse childhood experiences?
I think the death of a parent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So death of a parent, a loved one, somebody close to a child.
Divorce of parents early.
Mm-hmm. Divorce of parents, and especially when it happens early on, in a child's life.
Discrimination based upon a disability.
Right. Yeah. Discrimination based on a disability. So that's kind of a two-parter, having a particular lived experience, and then that's out of your control, and then being discriminated for that.
Or racial or other discrimination based upon a particular lifestyle.
Absolutely. So racial discrimination, discrimination against the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community, discrimination. I know socioeconomic discrimination happens, lots of different things. Intense stress without healthy coping, child sexual abuse, physical abuse, witnessing a crime, physical or mental abuse, violence, bullying, You guys are doing a great job of bringing up some that are not a part of the ACE original study, and many of the studies on ACEs, you're bringing up those community, those interpersonal outside of the family unit experiences. Great, thank you for sharing. So somebody asked, will you give some examples? And I like to first hear what people, what just comes to mind for us, right? Because adverse childhood experiences, those words just kind of out there could incorporate anything, right? All kinds of adversity, and that is legitimate and valid. And absolutely. And there is research done on particular adversity and connecting that with the people's lives and their entry into adulthood and what happens later on in life. So I like to just kind of see what you know, but I will highlight what is in the research about that. So adversity, I'm going to give some definitions so that we're clear about what we're talking about. At least in the conversations that I'm having with people, I want to be clear about what I'm referring to. So in general, and this is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, adversity is a state or instance of serious or continued difficulty or misfortune that can be potentially traumatic. Okay, so it might be kind of a ongoing an ongoing situation, a chronic circumstance. It also could be a, one-time thing, right? An instance of something happening, but it could also be something that several different things happening. It could be circumstantial when we think about, I know like my parents got divorced when I was 18. When we think about that example, like divorce, what I remember from it is not the day they went to the courthouse and like got all the paperwork, right? And it was finalized. It was all the other circumstances around it that was difficult and upsetting and adversity, right? So I can't even remember when it was finalized. I don't have that, right? But I have all the other, emotional and interpersonal and talking about it and how people responded and then what happened in our home, right? All of those things. And adversity is potentially traumatic, but not necessarily trauma, okay? So we want to be clear about our words and how we frame things. And one rule of thumb for me is trying really hard to never put a word on somebody's experience, but ask them what it was like for them. Ask them how they identify that experience, what they call it. A lot of people don't like the words adversity and trauma. A lot of people don't like the word resilience. There's pushback when people have had significant adversity. And when people talk about, oh, they're so resilient and all those kinds of things, some people don't like that. There's pushback. So we don't want to put that on individuals, groups, communities. We want to ask them what it was for them. Trauma, identified by SAMHSA. So SAMHSA stands for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It's a government federal entity, and they do a ton of research. They put out all kinds of materials. I encourage you to take a look at their website. They have a lot of really good stuff. And they define trauma as resulting from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening and has lasting adverse effects on their functioning and physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. So how this is kind of laid out typically is called the 3 E's. There's an event, there's how somebody experienced that event, and then the short and long-term effects of that event. And if certain things are in place, then that qualifies that as trauma. So, being a mental health professional, right? I understand all of those things. How I actually work with somebody, how I talk with somebody about it is not maybe even ever using those words, right? But saying, what was that like for you? What happened? How is life now? What is life like now for you? How are your relationships? How do you feel in your body? What do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about the world? What gives you meaning? I'm not saying, okay, so what's the event that happened, right? I'm not saying, So now how do you frame that? Because I need to check off the experience box. But I'm curious about somebody's life experience. And I'm not saying it's always appropriate to ask somebody about the trauma experience they've had. But that's kind of how it's broken down. And one of the most powerful questions I've found is helpful when somebody has opened up to me about something adverse or traumatic for them, or they've named it as that, is asking, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about other people? And what do you believe about the world as a result of this? And often when it has been stored as trauma and hasn't been resolved or worked through or treated or addressed, is those beliefs we would state very simply, even though I don't love this word, as negative beliefs, right? So I'm unlovable, nobody can be trusted, the world is unsafe, right? So those are kind of those core beliefs that can be formed out of traumatic or adverse experiences that tend to be more negative and all or nothing. Right. So I knew somebody who was raised in a home where there wasn't necessarily physical violence, but the mom said, nobody can be trusted, only I can. So only tell me things, stay home. The outside world is not safe. And that message was told over and over to this person. And so by the time they reached adulthood and did eventually move out and have their own kids, right, that's all they were told and knew. So that was a core belief, until they realized that some people do seem trustworthy and some people actually seem to care about me. And I'm not sure how to reconcile that with nobody can be trusted. So those are that really difficult, kind of inflexible beliefs that can be formed out of trauma. I like the definition Peter Levine gives because I think it addresses some of those traumas or adversity that become trauma that aren't like, it's not a violent act. It's not a death. It's not abuse, a physical abuse. It's an emotional thing that's played out. It's an interpersonal dynamic that's played out. So a basic rupture, loss of connection to ourselves, our families, and the world. So anytime where there's that loss of connection, right, can be a trauma. And then there's resilience. And like I said, some people don't like that word. I tend to not like it, especially when we're saying, oh gosh, children are just so resilient. Gosh, they just bounce back. Because a lot of times what children do is they're just good at surviving, right? And that can be resilience, right? But they learn how to survive. So they learn how to be okay, right? Or they learn how to just push through, shove it down, right? Compartmentalize that terrible thing that happened, but it still might be wreaking havoc in their bodies and their brains and their sense of self. And right. And so saying that without really knowing how this kid is doing or this family is doing or this community is doing sometimes can be a disservice. So we want to be careful with that word and again putting it on people, but rather just being curious about how have you survived, right? How has this played out for you? So Edith Grotberg has done all kinds of resilience studying and continues to do that to this day, says it's the human capacity to deal with, overcome, learn from, or even be transformed by the inevitable adversities of life. So it can be a really powerful way of looking at things, and even help us again with those, what I would call open-ended questions, right? So how have you dealt with this? What have you learned from this experience? What transformation, if any, have you experienced? What happened before, what's happened during, and what happens now for you? How do you keep on moving forward? What keeps you going? So in the ACEs study, again, the original one asked 10 questions about 10 different adverse childhood experiences, and they ask it in a way to say, what of these things happened before your 18th birthday? So this tree was developed by several people. You have the resource down here, the citation down here, but they created it, and this part up here is referring to all of those ACE questions on that original 1996 to 1998 ACE study done in Southern California with 17,000 people. They were HMO members, worked with Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control did this study, and they asked them all kinds of questions about their health, about their relationships, about ACEs, and asked about before, in their childhood. And then they did all kinds of measures of how they're functioning now. And they looked at the correlation between a number of ACEs and then physical, interpersonal, substance use, mental health issues that they experience now. So they asked about, mom experiencing depression when they were growing up, divorce or separation happening, any mental illness in the home, a family member incarcerated, emotional and sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, substance use, all those were asked about. And then they were able to kind of chart, right, the correlation between those and then their current functioning. What I like about this image is that it doesn't just stop there, but it looks at some of those, systems in place that create environments where ACEs happen, right? So the root system, what's in the soil, there's a approach called the groundwater approach. They talk about what's in the water, right? What's in the groundwater seeping up into the soil, into the roots, and into what we actually see more of, what's happening. So systems of discrimination, one of you brought up discrimination, poverty, generational poverty, community disruption, lack of opportunity, social capital. And we might look at poverty and say it's not just poverty existing, it's our, social support systems that don't define poverty accurately. And so people who actually are living in poverty, not all of them even qualify for our programs that could help them, because we define poverty in such an arbitrary way, right? So we can get deeper into our policies and our procedures and our programming that actually was created on purpose and doesn't help certain groups of people, right? Keeps some groups lower and promotes others. Okay. This
Annie,
image, yeah, go ahead, Greg.
aren't you also into environmental justice issues? That is, that the poverty may be created by the discrimination, but also maybe because of a lack of clean water and clean air.
Absolutely.
So that its environment is extremely important. How about not having adequate air conditioning in or flood protection or fire protection in this day and age?
Exactly.
So I thought, maybe what I'm saying. Can you give us a couple examples after you're done of your presentation of some positive things that you've seen recently that might be thing that would be inspirational, even in Anderson or wherever, because I know there are.
I'm writing this down, Greg. Yeah.
I was thinking about Carl Erskine and what he did for Down syndrome right there in Anderson that became a worldwide issue. And, discrimination against Down syndrome and how he came forth and remarkable success.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg. And Greg, you brought us to the next image here of, again, looking at what's in the ground, but also what's in the environment, right? Which the ground obviously is a part of that. We could be more complicated with this image, but we can only do so much with kind of illustrating these adverse experiences. It's not just what's in the tree, right? It's what's in our environment. It's the pandemics that have happened. It's the environmental crises that we see with drought and heat and global warming and the choices we're making, right? Again, the systems that are in place that either can help or hurt these things that we then start experiencing, right? We tend to be able to put our finger on what the temperature is in certain areas. And I know, like, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and they had like record heat last year. I think they went, I don't know how many days, but it was dozens of days without any kind of rain, right? And people literally died on the street, like people who are unhoused couldn't get into a safe, cooler spot we're literally dying, right, from heat exhaustion. We have that in Indiana with cold, dying from the freezing temperatures. And we see that, right? We can kind of name and put our finger on that, but it's harder to look at what even led to that in the first place, right? Why isn't there a safe place for these people to go? But even deeper, what's causing those record heat and cold? And like you said, Greg, even somebody's home, right, in one area of town versus another. What we know is when we just look at zip codes alone, we can estimate how long somebody's going to live just knowing their zip code. And so we need to be looking at, okay, so what's happening, right? It's not somebody's fault. Like, well, you chose to live in that zip code, so that's why you're going to die younger. That has nothing to do with like individual choice or morality or, that kind of thing. That's a systemic ingrained issue. So I'm not going to have you share out loud. Just, yeah, go ahead, Greg.
One more thing, that is discriminatory zoning and redlining,
Yes,
and all that is
that's right.
coming in to play in the big picture, that those people are there for reasons that may not entirely reflect where they really want to be. So, and how about
Absolutely.
changing maps with additional flooding and 1,000-year floods instead of 100-year floods? Yeah, it's a big issue, and
Yeah.
this country's got to come to grips with it.
Exactly. And that, when we think about beliefs, right? And so what we believe about ourselves, our communities, our family, the world, well, some people grew up in homes where certain, maybe what some of us may say was absolute truth and has been researched and documented, where they're getting a message of that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. So even believing certain things about systems, right? We're having to fight with things that seem like, that's a fact. And some people won't, even buy into that. And like I said, the idea of ACEs are preventable, it's really hard for me to buy into that belief. And so I'm continuing to dig in and look at, are they? And what does that look like? And what's my role? Yeah, thank you, Trina, for noting the specific presentation that you saw. Yeah. Whew. Yeah, 17-year life expectancy difference when looking at different neighborhoods and communities. Absolutely. So I'm not going to stay long here because we've talked about some of it already, but this is a website. I'm going to send this presentation to Wendy and she'll share it out with you all. But this is a website linked in it at vetoviolence.cdc.gov. And it just kind of takes you through what are ACEs, looking at those studies now that have been collected between 2011 and 2020. What's the experience of ACEs among people kind of across the US. So again, that kind of 2/3 number, 2/3 of us have experienced one or more ACEs. 17% is the number they're showing when we look across the US. So in Southern California in the 1998 study, their number was about 12.5% of people experiencing 4 or more ACEs. And so you see, 17%, that's a fairly statistically significant increase, right? Or not even necessarily increase, but when we span the whole US and looking at more diverse communities, because that Southern California study, it wasn't as diverse of a group as across the US. Right, that number is even higher of experiencing 4 or more. And when we look at that 4 or more number, we see drastic higher likelihood of things like having multiple sexual partners, having smoking, likelihood to smoke. The rates of suicidality are hugely increased when somebody has 4 or more ACEs. So, the lethality of having 4 or more ACEs is very high. Having heart disease, I've read things about like broken bones. So, you know, if you're seeing that in a child early on, higher likelihood to develop different conditions that aren't as common in childhood. But seeing that at higher rates in certain communities, like that should indicate, let's look a little deeper, not assume it's about adversity and trauma, but be curious about, why are these numbers so high? What is causing this? What's happening in their homes and communities? And then it like highlights the certain groups that are more likely to have experienced ACEs and ACEs in higher numbers. One of the groups of people, so it says non-Hispanic, American Indian, or Alaskan Native people and multiracial people experiencing higher numbers of ACEs. And I read that in other studies, people who identify as biracial or multiracial, they're experiencing ACEs in higher numbers. And when you learn about racial equity issues, the history of racism, the experience of people who are multiracial, some of the learning that I've had, it made a lot of sense. I was a little bit surprised initially that it didn't say particular racial groups having higher numbers, but the multiracial experience. And some people in my life, at least, have shared about not belonging in either group because of that biracial and multiracial identity of, I don't really fit in with my Black peers, and I don't really fit in with my white peers, or I don't really fit in with the Latino community, and I don't really fit in with the white or Black community, right? And they identify in both. And so that lack of belonging, right, or other people not including, right, because it's not the person's fault, it's the way we're set up as we don't include well. That experience has been really, really challenging, which makes a lot of sense. So it just kind of walks you through the impact of ACEs, all those kinds of things. So I wanted to make sure you saw that.
Let's open it up to questions that we might have for our honored guest, Andy.
You brought us to the right slide.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'll open it up. So
Yeah.
there are so many opportunities either through training parents and having elected officials being impactful. There's a lot of multiple ways. Does it all come down to putting empathy first? If you empathize about someone else, how will that impact them, and what can we do to reduce a negative impact?
Yeah, so let me take us here. So these are the identified positive childhood experiences. Okay. And you identified one of them, right? When a child, so these are asked of adults before their 18th birthday, did they have these experiences? But feeling able to talk with your family about feelings, right? Empathy would have to be a skill that adults in the home have, right? Having at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in you. You'd have to have that skill as an adult of empathy, of compassion, of care, of interest for a child, you know, for somebody to report, yeah, I did feel that way. So absolutely. I don't think that's the only thing, but I think that obviously, you know, 2 of those things, but even family standing by you, feeling safe and protected, right? Empathy, compassion, having those kinds of emotional intelligence skills as an adult so that children feel that way is huge. Feeling supported by your friends, they would have to have some of those skills. Absolutely. Yeah.
So having
What
so having a nuclear family versus an extended family in your area, because everybody we're mobile, and now with COVID, everything's online, and people are more and more isolated. It's harder to meet these 7 identified criteria.
Yeah. Or even the skills required, right? Like we missed some time now, and even little ones, right? But we all miss some time to keep working on these skills or developing them or seeing them modeled in several different settings. I think about families with, like, my best friend had a baby right after COVID hit, right? The shutdown. And yeah, just the isolation. And so unless you have a lot of support or you already have those skills, well, then those parents are trapped in their homes. And so if they don't have those skills, where they're not going out places, so this kid, this baby, this infant is not seeing other people demonstrate, oh, it's so, oh, you're crying, right? Like, I mean, just so simple, changing our faces when a baby starts crying, right? Naming their emotion before they're able to do that, soothing them in certain ways. If that's not existing in the home, yeah, there's whole, generations of kids that didn't experience that for that period of time in the home. And there were no other places they were going to have the opportunity, right? That two non-parent adults who took a genuine interest, right? That wasn't happening during COVID for many families and kids. Absolutely.
Who
Yeah.
else has questions? Just go ahead and ask them.
Well, I'm wondering how we can take this information and do more with the programs we already offer.
Mhm.
And this might, I'm sure this is also part of a longer conversation, and we can definitely
Yeah.
talk about it later. But are there any, say, one or two things that we might think of doing as
Yeah.
individuals or as a club?
Yeah. So, oh, I don't want to go here. Give me a second. Let me. So, I'm going to skip this slide and go here. So here are the things that we know help heal and recover from ACEs. And definitely all these things help prevent as well, help kind of buffer our systems and also help prevent ACEs. But that relationship piece, so there are researchers that talk about, they say relationships are the single most healing resource we can tap into when somebody has experienced trauma or adversity. Being safe, supportive, stable, right? And just showing up. That is going to be the most preventative, but also the most healing resource. And then tapping into things like mental health resources. And I'm not just, definitely being more aware and creating more robust mental health systems, absolutely, but being mental health informed ourselves, right? There's a training called Youth Mental Health First Aid. Highly recommend that one, to just understand a little more of how that works and what you do in a crisis, but also how do you just be more sensitive to the mental health needs somebody may have, and specifically focused on youth. Mindfulness practices, being present in the here and now, and there's a lot of research on that. I can connect you with resources there. There's a book called Burnout, and it is geared towards a female audience because it debunks a lot of myths that females have been told about our bodies and but they do a wonderful job of explaining how stress impacts all of us, and then things that we can do to reduce the likelihood of burnout. And they talk about eating, sleeping, movement, and compassion towards ourselves. And so I think, very practically, like these all to me feel like real practical things that you all can engage in or help promote in your communities, right? Just keeping those things in mind and being sensitive to what your community and what the children are experiencing. So thinking about, I know teachers talking about kids not getting enough sleep at home, right? And so teachers who are mental health informed, trauma informed, they know to let that kid nap at their desk or provide a space in the classroom to actually let them sleep, or maybe connect with the social worker where they actually could get some sleep at school, right? Nutrition. Our school system, the minute you walk in, if you're late for school, if you're on time, they always say, hey, you can go get breakfast. But if you're late, they always ask, did you eat today? Or when is the last time you ate? Or did you have breakfast? And if they haven't eaten, haven't had breakfast, sometimes my children lied and said they hadn't, even though I knew they had eaten, right? They make sure they eat the first thing they do when they arrive at school, right? So, you know, I'm really big on any kind of family programming for children, making sure there's food always. Always. I work with a group of youth, and they're a group of women, and I work with youth, and they we all are very resourced people, the adults working with them. And so one of the adults told a story. They said, well, the youth helped with something, and then afterwards we're like, hey, do you want to go to Dairy Queen, get a treat, you know, now that we've done that? And they were like, yes, yes. And when they got to get Dairy Queen, they had entire meals. I mean, that's what they ordered. They didn't order ice cream. They got meals, right? And took some stuff home. And that happened in every single activity we did with them. They would bring food home to their families and they would eat, right? And we just were like, okay, right? And most of them had never been to Dairy Queen, right? So our resource, right? It just was a total shift, and like, okay, we need to be thinking about that every single time we're together, right? Moving our bodies is the strongest prevention of burnout. So moving your body is really important, right? So how are we incorporating that in the things that we're doing with each other as adults so that we don't get burned out from this work, but also, you know, I don't know all of the things you do with your work and volunteering. And so, you know, promoting that, right now we're sitting for an hour. What I need to do after this is go outside probably, right? And I know that now because I've, you know, trained on this and put these kinds of resources together. But I used to just sit and sit and sit and sit and sit and then be pissed off and eat candy and, you know, sugar, fat, salt when I got home and wonder why I was so, you know, mad at the world. It's like, okay, I didn't move today. That's why. I don't know if that helps, Wendy, but I think these are really practical tools.
Hey, Ann,
Yeah.
this is Bill Murphy. I'm sorry I got in
Yes.
a little
Thanks,
late.
Bill.
I enjoyed
No problem.
enjoyed the presentation. And in that light, if you want to move, I know Mary and I and Duke would love to put you to work at the Salvation Army. We've got Harbor Light that would be wonderful, that we can put you in charge working with folks there, or the Lily Women's Center. So again, I think to your point, it's hard to know where to start. You
Yeah.
have the empathy, you have the will, you recognize the need, but where do you put that energy? And we would, I'll just throw that out there. If you want to put together book bags, or you want to just be present and help out and be a positive influence, we'd love to have you. So I'll throw that out, and thanks again for joining us.
Yeah.
It was a great presentation.
Thank you, Bill. And what Bill is saying, I think is really important. I just said this in a meeting the other day because we were kind of talking about what do we do programming wise with certain things. And I was saying we need to connect with what already exists. So with our youth, not being like, we need to now do a program, but what programs are out there, and making sure as many youth are connecting with those and kids are connecting with those, and us showing up ourselves, right, to help, to volunteer, or, you know, for me, I get to do some of that work as a part of my job. Um, but what already exists that promotes these things, and showing up or getting people there or whatever you need to do, so that they're getting those experiences. I know there's a man I know, he runs a nonprofit. We just now we're funding their organization, one of their projects, and they're new, they're very grassroots, and kids don't have a safe place to go during the summer, and so he started a safe summer series, and he's reaching the Black community, and in large numbers, and that's something we need in our community. There just isn't a lot that exists for pockets of Anderson. And so I went and helped this week. Erin came with me. I mean, it was awesome. They had all kinds of these things checking off. There was movement. We were outside the whole time. There was music. They fed everybody. They encouraged the adults to eat too, though, right? Like there was this kind of 2-gen, 3-gen dynamic there. So that supportive relationships, it wasn't just a couple adults and a ton of kids. Like the community showed up. People brought food, people brought drinks. I mean, just randomly, seriously, it was this like really cool, beautiful outpouring that wasn't perfectly packaged, right? It wasn't perfect. But there was a need. He's already meeting it. I don't need to create a new system, but I can connect with what he's doing and what they're doing to make that possible.
Annie, Greg Silver, last question that I
Yes.
have. I'm sorry, I've been so questioning, but there's a lot of important things you've been doing. So it takes all of us in our own way to make a difference. And I think what you're doing, what United Way does, and what Carl Erskine did, for example. But it also takes, with the governor's race coming up, you should be in touch with each governor candidate and try to make sure that the schools are educating the opportunities that are there. So they don't know. I mean, the kids don't know. So that
Yep.
should be something that should be taught or statewide.
Absolutely.
That there are remedies for all these problems that you've been talking about to some extent,
Yep.
extent of improvement. Thanks for being
Yeah,
here.
and
I
Greg,
hope
you
work-
brought up, there's a lot of civic
Yeah.
engagement groups out there. I imagine Indy has way more than we do. I'm a part of one. It's the main one in Anderson right now, where we are nonpartisan and doing some of that kind of work, making sure our citizens know who's running for office. I started doing a voter guide with my colleague in this group. So we've done one now since 2022. And yeah, just giving the information, right? Asking some of the candidates questions and saying, okay, here community, like here's how they responded. Who do you want to choose, right? You say you want change, and so this is a way we can give back and say, okay, so here are who's running, and so
And
yeah,
here
that's
and
civics.
your options are out there, and they need to get the
Absolutely.
word.
Yeah, you have
Anything else?
choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Annie, thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Mary.
This
Yeah,
was,
and
very educational.
I will, I hope so. I'll get the slides to you all, and feel free to share with your group and use how it works for you.
Well, thank you so much. And we are going to give a donation in your honor to Trinity Haven. Their mission is to provide safe, affirming housing to LGBTQ plus youth experiencing housing instability. And the dad joke today, since she brought up Dairy Queen and it's summertime, here we go, folks. Where do you learn to make a banana split? At Sunday school. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much. And all of you have a great Independence Day. Bye-bye. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you, Mary, for the donation, and you all appreciate that. It's very, very kind.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you. And Annie, I'm going to reach out to you afterwards.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, great.
Thanks so
All right.
much. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.